On December 2nd, 1804, inside the vast Cathedral of Notre Dame, history held its breath. The Pope stood ready. The crown of France gleamed under candlelight. Europe watched. And then, in a moment that would define an era, Napoleon Bonaparte did something no French ruler had ever dared to do. He took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head. Not crowned by God, not crowned by tradition, crowned by himself. In that single act, a young artillery officer from a small Corsican family declared something extraordinary to the world. Destiny was not inherited, it was seized. But how does a man rise from obscurity to dominate Europe, only to lose everything on a muddy battlefield in Belgium? This is the story of ambition without limits. This is the rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, just after France had taken control of the island. He was not fully French. He spoke with a heavy accent, and to many in mainland France, he was an outsider. As a boy, he was sent to military school in France, where wealthier students mocked his Corsican background. Napoleon withdrew into books, history, mathematics, strategy.
Soldiers, look to
While
the horizon.
others dreamed of glory on horseback, Napoleon focused on artillery, the science of war. For him, victory was not about courage alone. It was about calculation. Then came the earthquake that changed Europe forever, the French Revolution. The monarchy collapsed. King Louis XVI was
Soldier,
executed.
take this bread. Keep your
Across
strength up.
Europe,
Thank you,
kings
sir.
and
Much
queens
obliged.
watched in fear as revolution consumed France. The country descended into chaos, executions, political struggles, paranoia. But chaos often creates opportunity. In 1793, during the siege of Toulon, a young Napoleon demonstrated extraordinary brilliance. Through bold artillery placement, he forced the British fleet to retreat. He was only 24 years old, and suddenly France had discovered a rising star. Just a few years later, France faced enemies on all sides. The revolutionary government needed victories desperately. So in 1796, they handed command of the Army of Italy to a thin, intense 26-year-old general. Many expected failure. Instead, they witnessed lightning. Napoleon moved faster than anyone imagined possible. He split enemy armies before they could unite. He marched beside his soldiers, sharing their hunger and exhaustion, and he inspired them with promises of glory. Soldiers, he told them, "You are naked and ill-fed, but I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world." And he did. Within a single year, he crushed Austria's forces in northern Italy and forced them to make peace. Europe was stunned. This was no ordinary commander. Napoleon was bold, strategic, and unpredictable. But victory only fueled his ambition. Napoleon did not just want victories, he wanted legacy. In 1798, he launched a daring campaign to Egypt, hoping to threaten Britain's trade routes to India. But this was not only a military expedition. Napoleon brought scientists, scholars, and artists with him. It was an invasion mixed with exploration. At first, the campaign was successful. Napoleon defeated the Mamluk forces at the Battle of the Pyramids. But soon disaster struck at sea. The British Admiral Horatio Nelson destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Napoleon and his army were stranded. Supplies dwindled. The dream of empire in the East began to crumble. And yet Napoleon made a shocking decision. He left. Abandoning his army in Egypt, he secretly sailed back to France, because in Paris, power was slipping, and Napoleon intended to take it. France was exhausted by years of revolution and instability. The government was weak and corrupt. When Napoleon returned, he was welcomed as a hero. In 1799, he staged a coup d'etat. The plan nearly failed, but in the end, Napoleon emerged as the first consul of France, effectively its ruler. He promised the nation three things: order, stability, and glory, and he delivered. Napoleon reformed France's laws through the Napoleonic Code, creating a legal system based on equality before the law and protection of property. He restructured education, centralized government power, and stabilized the economy. France was no longer revolutionary chaos. It was becoming something new, an empire in waiting. In 1804, Napoleon made his boldest move yet. He declared himself emperor. Not emperor of France, but emperor of the French. The title suggested his power came from the people. But Europe saw something different. They saw a revolutionary general turning himself into a monarch, and they were determined to stop him. What followed was more than a decade of near constant war. Between 1805 and 1809, Napoleon seemed unstoppable. His greatest triumph came at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805. Facing larger Austrian and Russian armies, Napoleon lured them into a brilliant trap and shattered their forces. It was a masterpiece of military strategy. Soon Prussia fell. Austria fell again. Across Europe, nations either bowed to Napoleon or were ruled by his relatives. His brothers became kings. His generals became princes. France stood at the center of a new European order. But one enemy refused to submit: Britain. Unable to defeat Britain at sea after the disaster at Trafalgar, Napoleon turned to economic warfare. He introduced the Continental System, a massive blockade designed to cut Britain off from European trade. If Britain could not trade, its economy would collapse. At least that was the plan. In reality, the system proved impossible to enforce. Smuggling spread across Europe, economies suffered, and many of Napoleon's allies grew resentful. Among them was Russia. When Russia withdrew from the Continental System, Napoleon decided to force compliance. In 1812, he assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen. More than 600,000 soldiers marched east into Russia. Napoleon expected a decisive battle. Instead, the Russians retreated deeper into their vast country. As they withdrew, they burned crops, villages, and supplies behind them. When Napoleon finally reached Moscow, he found the city nearly empty. Soon after, fires consumed it. Winter was approaching. Food was scarce. Napoleon had no choice but to retreat. What followed was one of the greatest disasters in military history: starvation, frostbite, constant attacks from Russian forces. Of the 600,000 soldiers who entered Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned. The myth of Napoleon's invincibility was broken. Across Europe, nations saw their chance. Prussia, Austria, Russia, and Britain united against him. In 1813, at the massive Battle of Leipzig, known as the Battle of Nations, Napoleon suffered a crushing defeat. The Allied armies marched toward Paris, and in 1814, Napoleon was forced to abdicate. He was exiled to the small Mediterranean island of Elba. The man who once ruled most of Europe was now ruler of a tiny island. For many leaders, that would have been the end. But Napoleon was not like other leaders. In 1815, he escaped. Sailing from Elba, he returned to France. Troops were sent to arrest him. Instead, something extraordinary happened. One by one, they joined him. As Napoleon marched toward Paris, his army grew larger with every mile. The king fled, and Napoleon reclaimed the throne. The world watched in disbelief. This dramatic return became known as the 100 Days. But Europe would not allow history to repeat itself. The Allied powers gathered their armies once more, and on June 18, 1815, near a small village in Belgium called Waterloo, the final chapter began. The battlefield was soaked with rain. Napoleon delayed his attack, waiting for the ground to dry. That delay proved fatal. British forces under the Duke of Wellington held their defensive lines. Then, in the late afternoon, Prussian reinforcements arrived. Napoleon's army began to collapse. For the first time in his career, Napoleon faced a defeat from which he could not recover. In a single day, the man who once dominated Europe lost everything. This time, there would be no second return. Napoleon surrendered to the British and was exiled once more, this time to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, far from Europe, far from power, far from armies, far from history's stage. There, under British guard, Napoleon spent his final years dictating memoirs and reflecting on his life. He portrayed himself as a champion of revolution, a victim of circumstance, a leader betrayed by fate. In 1821, Napoleon Bonaparte died at the age of 51, possibly from stomach cancer. But his legacy never faded. Was Napoleon a tyrant? He crowned himself emperor, censored the press, and waged wars that killed millions. Yet he also transformed Europe. He spread ideas of legal equality, merit-based advancement, and modern administration. The Napoleonic Code still influences legal systems today. His campaigns reshaped nations, inspired revolutions, and changed warfare forever. Napoleon was both conqueror and reformer, visionary and dictator, a man of contradictions. Perhaps that is why his story still fascinates the world. Because Napoleon was not just a ruler,
He was an era, and even in defeat, he refused to be forgotten. In the end, Napoleon proved something powerful. Destiny was not inherited, it was seized.